What's going on, everybody? It's your boy Gsluke here with our weekly course breakdown. This time we've got the Arnold Palmer Invitational, the API over there at Bay Hill Club and Lodge. One of the tougher tracks that we see on all the PGA Tour. I was there last year for Sunday. It was blowing 30-40 miles an hour, and the scoring average was I believe nearly even 4 shots over par. So you can see carnage just like you get there at PGA National, and because of the elevated field, I've bribed myself into going to the event. We're going to be there Wednesday through Sunday, so much like this week, going to have some boots on the ground there at Bay Hill. And in this video, going to get you prepared for your research. Going to go through everything you need to know about the track, some of the course specifics. We'll go hole by hole, show you a few of the shots that'll be facing these players. And then at the end, probably most importantly, going to go through our key metrics for analysis and our comp courses around the PGA Tour, the kinds of metrics and courses that you can use to try and identify your top plays, whether you're playing on DFS, whether you're trying to go out there and take outrights. These are the kind of things that you want to pay attention to this week when trying to decide between some of these top-end players, because like I said, just an elevated field, stacked field, all of the top players going to be playing. It's going to be hard to choose between those guys up top, or even some of those 7-8K guys on DFS that for this week could have very well been your headliners for last. So like I said, a lot to get into. Let's go ahead and get this thing started. Bay Hill Club and Lodge, just south of Orlando, a beautiful course, going to be there on site, and one of the tougher tracks. And it's not really from the ball striking perspective. It's a par 72 like the Honda, a little bit longer at 7,466 yards, but the fairways and the greens aren't all that hard to hit. So first off, your fairways right around 33 yards wide. Your greens are 7,500 square foot per green, which are both pretty much right on par with what you saw at the Honda. So when we look at the fairway in the GIR averages, they're right about average. In fact, the driving accuracy is only 0.8% lower than your PGA Tour average. And your green and regulation percentage, which is more significantly below the average, a lot of that is because of how firm and fast the greens are, was still a 60.1% rate, which is only 8% lower than your PGA Tour average course. So last year, this course, Bay Hill Club and Lodge, played 1.89 shots over par. So that ball striking effect was not the reason for that. And kind of like what you have at PGA National, it's typically because of how firm and fast the greens are. Also, the rough over here at Bay Hill tends to be a little bit gnarlier than what you have there at PGA National. Both of those are reflected. So first off, the rough length, it's a 3-inch perennial ryegrass overseed. So you have that Bermuda base layer like you have at pretty much every track down here, but that gnarly sticky ryegrass. And that's kind of what this course is known for. I mean, most Florida tracks don't have much rough to begin with, but when they go out there, they purposely add this overseed and they let it grow out to around 3.5 inches. I know last year on Sunday, it looks closer to 4.5 inches with some of the rain they were getting. That's extremely hard to get out of, and with how many water hazards are on property, how many chipping hollows are around the track that you can get into, this is where the penalty lies, right? When you miss, you're going to have some of the most difficult around the green shots on all of the PGA Tour, and when you end up hitting it into hazards, of course, like over there at PGA National, you're going to be looking at penalty strokes, doubles, triple bogeys, and though there's not as much water on property, only water in play on 9 of 18 holes as opposed to 15 of 18 there last week, still a ton of penalty shots to be had. In fact, one of the top 5 courses on tour when it comes to penalty strokes. A few other things to note when you're looking at some of the correlated stats. Around the green is like by far the most important stat here. So when we get to the key stats later, that'll certainly be in the top 3. It's a course where I would say driving accuracy is a little bit more important than driving distance, though it is a little bit lengthier than what you have at PGA National. There's a ton of hazards to get into play, and because that rough is as penal as it is, in fact, plays to a 0.42 missed fairway penalty, which is well above your tour average. That's where the accuracy comes in, right? When you're trying to hit 160, 170 yard approach shots, being able to hit out of the fairway is at a huge advantage when the rough gets, to that 3-inch plus length. A few other things to note out here, the golf course has not changed since last year, have not been any renovations, so pretty much going to be the exact same. The only slight difference would be on the fairways, where last year they did not overseed them. This year, you do have that Bermuda grass that is overseeded with that perennial ryegrass, so just like the rough, of course, just manicured much better there in the short stuff. And the greens, they don't have a stimp meter reading on here. Last year, they were running at right around 12s. I would imagine they start right about that same rate, maybe get a little bit faster towards the 12.5, 13 rate, because that's what I saw there on Sunday. They were running a lot faster than what you're used to seeing. PGA National usually dries out the same kind of way. And by the time we got to the weekend there at the Honda, you saw that effect starting to creep in. So it's your typical Florida track. I would say the one thing we haven't touched on yet that might be the most important factor at this track is the weather. Kind of like what we have at PGA National. It's an exposed Florida track, extremely flat, which means when you start to get any sort of significant wind, whether it's a 15 to 20 mile an hour sustained wind, or what we saw there in Sunday where it was 30 to 40 mile an hour wind gusts, the scores are going to balloon. They can go from right about a 1 over par average, which is, I would say, under perfect conditions, what you're going to see from Bay Hill, still going to be a difficult track, to sometimes 2, 3, even 4 shots over par when the wind starts to kick up. So before you make your lineups, before you start to try and identify your top bets, all that kind of fun stuff, you really have to take a look at the weather forecast. If it's going to be windy, around the green is going to be more important. Those GAR, those fairway percentages are going to plummet, and it's going to become a little bit more like a major championship if that's going to happen. So definitely weather is something that we're going to have to keep an eye on. Last year, weather was a factor for about 2 out of the 4 rounds, and your winner ended up being Scotty Scheffler at 5 under par. Right? Billy Ho finished in second at -4. Really had a chance until the final hole. Was watching that live. Kind of ruined for Billy Boy, to be honest. Terrell Hatton shot -3 the last day, skyrocketed up the board with the average score well over par there. Victor Hovland shot +2, finished in second. He kind of choked it at the end. Chris Kirk, another top 5 player, and Gary Woodland. The one thing that all of those players have in I would say, like similarity with would be the weather prowess, right? Some of the best wind players on tour. Some solid around the green players as well, except for Victor Hovland, and maybe that's why he ended up choking it there, but had one of his best around the green weeks of the entire year. He was able to gain there at Bay Hill. So if you look at the leaderboard, I believe the only player that lost strokes around the green was Sam Burns, who finished tied for 9th. If you go down, the next loser is a John Rahm, believe it or not, the whole way down and tied for 17th. So with this elite tier field, with how difficult those shots are around the green, you're gonna have to be able to get done in that category, especially when the winds kick up. Alrighty guys, now let's go hole by hole. So hole number 1, not the easiest handshake. It's 457. The tee shot, you're usually going to hit a 3-wood, right? Try and keep it out of that gnarly rough in these fairway bunkers, but you're left with the mid to long iron shot. Some of the shorter players might have trouble even holding this green because of how shallow it is, and get used to it because the holes don't get all that much easier. Hole 2, a 200-yard par 3, right? Another shallow green, another surface that's hard to get up there and hold. So a lot of players are going to have to get up and down to save par, which again is a theme I think you should get used to. Hole 3, a difficult tee shot. You can choose to be more aggressive and take the line that I set here over the corner. What most players will end up doing is taking an iron or a 3-wood and hitting it here down to just the regular fairway, right? Not bringing that water into play. You'll still have players that hook it into the water. And if you end up bailing out to the right, the approach shot isn't that much easier. If you end up missing short right under this tree here, you'll have overhanging limbs that make it nearly impossible to try and take it high into the green. You'll have to either lay up to the right or try and play something along the ground that rolls up this little gully and onto the surface. And if you end up missing even further to the right, like behind the trees, a lot of times you'll just be laying up here and then trying to save par. So 3, though it's only 430 yards, extremely difficult. Hole 4, your first par 5, no water on this one, so a little bit more straightforward. Go out there, lay up if you need to if you're in that rough. But most players, if they hit the short stuff, are going to get up there in 2. So you'll see a few eagles. Hole 5, 382, but not drivable. If you really want to take a driver and bang it up near the surface, you can, like a Rory McIlroy, John Rahm may decide to do so, but a majority of these guys are going to lay up with an iron, potentially even just a hybrid or a fairway wood off the tee. So it's more of a pitch and putt than anything, right? Go out there, hit something like a 60 to 120 yard wedge. If you do decide to hit driver, you're going to bring a lot of this rough into play, a few of the trees to the left or right. So only the elite of the elite drivers are probably trying that. Hole 6 is your next par 5. This is the one where Bryson hit it over the corner. So most players, right, us mere mortals, gonna hit something like a driver or a 3-wood to the right. lay up over here to the right side, maybe go for the green in 2, right? It's about 260 yard shot to the center of the green. I would say the layup zone over here is closer to like 230, 240. So unless you hit a perfect drive, most players are likely going to end up right in front of the green. There's going to be stands over here. It's a lot of fun to watch hole number 6, but going to be a lot of blowups too. You'll see birdies, you'll see eagles, but you'll see a bunch of like doubles and triples mixed in. I mean, John Daly, I think, made an 18 at hole number 6. Hole 7, another 200-yard par 3. So like I said, get used to the difficult long iron shots. They're pretty much a regularity around here. Hole 8, 461, one of the more difficult holes on property. You miss to the left in this fairway bunker, you have a hard time even getting it to the green. If you end up with any sort of non-perfect contact, you'll end up with a water ball, probably looking at double bogey. And if you hit it over here to the right, if you try to go for the green, you're criminally insane. I would say 99% of people that end up in this right little treed area are going to end up laying up. And even if you just end up in the rough, not really blocked out by trees, you're going to see a ton of guys, kind of like the fairway bunker shot, that end up chunking it into the water. So when it's this back left pin, just prepare for absolute insanity. Going to be a lot of blowups on hole 8. Hole 9 is 489. It's one of the longer par 4s on property, so extremely difficult, well bunkered too. Got to bring your best around Bay Hill to even get it around even par, let alone an under par round. Hole 10 is 396. If they end up using split tees and using 10 as a starting hole, it's a lot easier than hole number 1, so maybe I slightly prefer it. One of the larger, less protected greens on property. So if I was looking at a handshake, right, a hole that I'd want to start on, it's probably this one. Hole 11 is 439. You have the water in play on the left, which is going to gobble up plenty of balls. You'll see doubles, triples here as well. If you end up bailing out to the right, it just makes the tee, or I should say approach shot, even more difficult, right? You miss in this first fairway bunker, you bring the water into play. I would say the second fairway bunker is where most people are going to miss if they end up missing here. But still, especially a difficult shot to a back left pin. Hole 12 is another par 5, 570. So straightforward, like the first one we saw there for hole 3, but 570, you've got to hit a solid tee shot to get home in 2. And a lot of players are going to be looking at that 30, 40-yard pitch shot to try and get a birdie here. So around the green play, not only important for when you're missing those long par 4s, but also for trying to make birdie at some of the longer par 5s. Hole 13, 370, another shorter par 4, but you can't really go for it, right? Obviously, the lake up here is going to keep most players with a 3-wood, maybe even a driving iron in hand. You can hit anything up to about 288 yards out there. So for Rory McIlroy, he might even have to worry about his 3-wood getting into this water. But if you get it in the short stuff, you're going to have a wedge in hand, right? Should be a birdie look for most players, which is well needed after all the body blows you've taken to this point. Hole 14, another 200-yard par 3. Pretty much all the par 3s here are some of the most difficult on all of the tour. Hole 15, 473, and this one's a heavy dogleg from left to right. So not only are you dealing with distance, you also have to create the correct angle into the green, especially dependent on pin location. And if you end up in the trees to the left, like plenty of guys will with driver, makes an extremely difficult angle into the green. And this fairway bunker to the right isn't much easier either. Hole 16, your easiest hole on property. So here you're going to see a bunch of eagles, okay? The unfortunate part is because of this water up here, and this green is also one of the more undulated on property, you're going to see doubles and triples here too. So kind of like hole number 6, it's risk reward galore. You're going to see guys that go out there, make their round, right, get to an eagle, and you're going to see guys, unfortunately, there with only 3 holes left, that blow up and eject themselves from the event. Hole 17, your last par 3, and you guessed it, another 200-yard plus par 3. So another difficult hole. In your closing hole, the water doesn't really come into play off the tee, right? Even if you hit driver, it would take a Rory McIlroy or a John Rahm kind of driver to get into that stuff, but in your second shot, it certainly does. If a lot of players are going to miss to the left, try and set up an angle into the screen, which works for your Thursday pin, right, which will be over there on the left side, but for the Sunday pin, where they tuck it there on the back right little knob, it doesn't matter where you hit it, right? You're going to have to challenge the water with your second shot, and if you end up bailing out to the left and in this rough patch here, it could be an extremely difficult approach. In fact, you'll see guys that even lay up here to the 18th green, particularly if there's somebody that's already in contention or your leader there on the 72nd hole. So a great finishing stretch. Billy Horschel was in the center of this green, putting to the back right pin, and came oh so close to making it and forcing a playoff, which would have been fun to see, but still, it always makes for some great entertainment and theater there on that final stretch. And now for our key stats for analysis, the types of metrics I'm using this week to identify my top plays. And number one, we've got shots gained approach, which is almost always going to be at least number 1 or 2 on this list. But what I want to focus on here is the long iron play. You can see with those par threes, right? All at least 200 yards. Plenty of those long par fours where you're hitting that 175 to 200 yard iron shot, or even on the par fives where you're obviously trying to go for 2 with something from the 220 to 250 yard range, or maybe even the 250 yard plus range. All of those long iron shots are, I would say, not twice as important at this course, but that would be ridiculous with the distribution. But if you look over there in Data Golf, they're all about 5 to 10% more likely to be used this week than pretty much on any other week on tour. So when I'm looking at proximity buckets, I'm looking long term at some of the better 175 to 200 yard players, all of those other 200 plus yard buckets that you can look at on databases to try and see, who gets it done, right? We can look at long par 3 scoring. That's another way to encapsulate that sort of effect. But as per usual with shots gained approach, it is typically the most consistent stat from week to week. It's the most important stat when it comes to these top end fields, major championship type of conditions. So no surprise there at number 1. Where there is a surprise might be at number 2, where shots gained around the green, typically not something that I'm endorsing very much here. Again, if you're looking for an outright winner, you're looking for a top end DFS play, you don't want your guys missing the green. And to go out there and post elite level around the green stats, you're going to have to miss plenty of greens. The thing is with Bay Hill, right? It's a 60% green and regulation percentage. Your elite tier guys like a Scotty Scheffler that gained like 8 strokes on approach last year still only hit about 70% of their greens. So it's not like even your winner is going to go out there and hit every single green. So guys like a Victor Hovland, who also ended up finishing there in the top 5, in fact tied for second last year, he gained around the green, which you might not expect, right? He's not one of the better around the green players on tour, but when we're trying to identify plays going into the week, around the green play, having a stout short game is a huge asset, right? The around the green shots, some of the most difficult that you have on tour. And just because somebody's a piss poor around the green player doesn't mean we have to eliminate them, right? So just because it is our number 2 key stat, keep in mind that guys like a Victor Hovland, for example, have found a lot of success here in their short-term sample size. So it's helpful, but it's not the end-all be-all. At number 3, though, we've got shots gained putting on Bermuda. So another stat that's a key fixture up here, but you really want to focus on is the Bermuda surface. You have some grainy Tiff Eagle Bermuda grass greens around here. But on top of that, we want to look at fast Bermuda greens. They tend to run at right around a 12 to start the week, if not closer to 13, even 13 and a half on the stimp meter from time to time by the time we get to Saturday and Sunday. So if you're going to look at any sort of specific putting splits out there, I'd be looking at those fast Bermuda greens. A few other key stats I'm honing in on. First off would be driving accuracy. I talked about before how penal that 3-inch ryegrass rough can be. So making sure that you can avoid that is a way that you can get to the top of the board. A lot of bombers tend to have success here too because they're a little bit more equipped to get out of that gnarly rough, but also, those accuracy kind of guys that you might not expect to show up at a 7,500 yard golf course have over the years when they've been able to avoid the short stuff, that long stuff, the rough out there, right? And keep it in the short stuff. A few other stats, you can look at bogey avoidance. You can look at long par 3 scoring, so 200 plus yard par 3s. You can take a look at hard conditions, right? Kind of like you saw at the Honda Classic, right? Shots gained when conditions get difficult, shots gained under windy conditions, shots gained during the Florida swing, I think is another way to look at that style of golf. And then of course, our shots gained at the comp courses, which we're going to go ahead and get into right now. And now for the comps. At number 1, we've got TPC Sawgrass, the stadium course. In fact, the course we're going to be at next week, so we'll be going into full detail about the players here. But in terms of a comp for the API, I think it's a spot-on comparison. You're looking at 2 relatively difficult tracks. Now, the ball striking test's a little bit different, right? More of the gnarly rough aspect at the API. At the players, actually even more water in play than what you're going to get this week, and also really difficult around the green shots. So while it's not a perfect comparison, the agronomy is the same around both tracks. They're in a similar spot of the state even, right? One's in Orlando, one's in Jacksonville, but that's like an hour and a half apart. It's not like you're dealing with Jacksonville versus South Florida where I'm at, right? There's, 4-hour drive at that point. So agronomy is similar. The weather tends to play similar at both tracks. And then you get that water volatility on top of some of the really difficult around the green shots. Not a surprise I'm looking at that for some of my comparison analysis. Also, we're looking at TPC Scottsdale. So Scotty Scheffler, right, a winner at both events last year. That would be the Waste Management Phoenix Open for Scottsdale. And then this week here at the API, both tracks where you have to have the long iron play, those 150 to 200 yard plus shots, those 200 to 225 yard iron shots are especially important at both tracks, but also really difficult around the green shots. When you miss at Scottsdale, you're going to have a hard time getting up and down. So when we were looking at our key stats there, you may remember that around the green was one of the top 3 stats, right? It was kind of surprising for that week, just like it's a little bit surprising here. But that's why we're looking at a lot of comparison, not only just that Scotty Scheffler won at both courses last year, but then also PGA National, the champion course. So where we were at last week, right? Not anything crazy there in terms of a comp, but another difficult Florida track where the around the green shots are difficult. You have fast Bermuda greens, right? Looking at a lot of those similarities. And from the ball striking perspective, while there's not as many long iron shots because it's only about a 7,100 yard course as opposed to about 7,500 yards or nearly 7,500 yards of what you're going to get here for the API, but still enough similarities to make it a track I'm looking at. If you're trying to find a few other comps, you could consider the Valspar Championship. You could look at Muirfield Village, another difficult, longer track. But those two, I would say slightly lower in terms of their usefulness as compared to the 3 that we have here. But still, like we do with comps, right? They're not the end all be all, but when you're pulling from 3 or 5 similar tracks, you'll see that somebody maybe has had success at 4 out of the 5 or at least 3 out of the 5. He might be worth a little bit of extra attention this week, as usually that skill set tends to translate across the tour. Alrighty guys, that is all I've got for this week's course breakdown. If you found it helpful, go ahead, smash that like button before you hop on out of here, and also make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the content in the future. We'll have DFS content dropping on later today. We'll have our core plays, our value plays dropping at some point before I leave for the event there on Wednesday. And of course on Wednesday evening, that'll be at 7 p.m. Eastern, same time as usual, I'll be going live covering everything you need to know. We'll go over the weather. I'm actually going to be at the Pro-Am on Wednesday, so I'll be able to give you a little report from what I saw out there, just like we did for the Honda this past week, and plenty of content for Showdown and for prize picks and underdog props over the weekend too. So we'll be doing streams for rounds 2 through 4. I'll be up there in Orlando out of the Airbnb I'm renting, be able to do some live content on the road as we used to do all the time out here, and have a good time with it once again. So like I said, if you're looking for that content, make sure you are subscribed so you don't miss any of that when it drops. But I appreciate everyone stopping by, showing all the love on the channel, consuming the content. You guys are the absolute best out there. Again, we'll be having all that content dropping. And until next time, guys, best of luck if you're going out there, if you're playing DFS, if you're putting any outright bets out there. Hopefully go out there and smash. Last week for DFS was one of the better weeks we've had for quite some time. From single entries and Showdown perspective, ended up cashing out quite nicely. On the prop side, left a little bit to be desired. We got screwed by a bunch of hooks. Just kind of felt like it was one of those weeks there. The reads were spot on. We're close, but no cigar, as I suppose they say. So we'll try and rebound on that side. But overall, really looking forward to it. Like I said, best of luck, and I will catch you guys next time.